Maya Chen never imagined she would be sitting in the grand auditorium of Riverside Music Academy on that cold November evening. The velvet seat beneath her felt expensive, the kind that made a soft whooshing sound when you sat down. Around her, she could hear the rustle of programs, the murmur of excited conversations, and the occasional cough echoing through what she imagined must be a massive space. She was 17 years old and had been blind since birth. The world had always been a symphony of sounds for her. While other kids learned to recognize faces, Maya learned to recognize footsteps. While they saw colors, she heard emotions in people's voices, and while they looked at beautiful things, Maya listened to them. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her dress. It was navy blue, or at least that's what her mother had told her that morning. Maya had learned long ago that colors were just words to her, labels without meaning. But navy blue sounded calm and sophisticated, so she liked it anyway. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" Her mother's voice came from the seat beside her, warm and gentle as always. "A little," Maya admitted, though that was an understatement. Her heart was pounding so hard she wondered if the people around her could hear it. Tonight wasn't just another recital at her local community center. This was the Riverside Music Academy, one of the most prestigious music schools in the entire country. Students here went on to play at Carnegie Hall and the Royal Albert Hall. And somehow little Maya Chen from apartment 4B had been invited to perform. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Patterson, her piano teacher for the past 13 years, had submitted a recording of Maya's performance without telling her. When the academy called, Maya thought it was a prank at first, but it wasn't. They wanted her to be a special guest performer at their annual showcase, sharing the stage with some of the finest young musicians in the nation. "You're going to be wonderful," her mother whispered, squeezing her hand. "Just like you always are." Maya wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at her insides. She had overheard some conversations earlier while waiting in the lobby. 2 women had been talking, their voices carrying more than they probably realized. "I think it's so sweet that they invited that blind girl," one had said. "Oh yes, such a nice gesture. Really shows the Academy's commitment to inclusion," the other had replied. Maya's stomach had twisted at those words. A nice gesture. Inclusion. They made her sound like a charity case, like her invitation was about kindness rather than talent. She had wanted to stand up and tell them that she had practiced 6 hours a day for most of her life, that her fingers knew every key of the piano, better than most people knew their own names. That music wasn't something she did despite being blind, but something that made sense because of it. But she had said nothing. She never did. The lights dimmed, though Maya only knew this because the conversations around her hushed, and her mother's posture shifted. A man's voice boomed through speakers, welcoming everyone to the showcase. Maya tried to focus on his words, but her mind kept drifting to what would happen later. She would walk onto that stage. She would sit at that piano, and she would either prove that she belonged there or confirm everyone's suspicion that she was just a feel-good story. The first performer was a violinist named Timothy. Maya listened intently as he played Vivaldi. He was technically proficient, each note precise and clear, but something felt missing. There was no soul in it, no story. It was like listening to someone read a dictionary. All the words were correct, but they didn't mean anything together. Next came a cellist, then a flutist, then a soprano whose voice soared so beautifully that Maya felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Each performer received polite applause. Maya clapped along, her palms already starting to sweat with anticipation. Then the host's voice returned, and something in his tone changed. It became more animated, more excited. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now have the privilege of welcoming a truly extraordinary talent to our stage. He has performed in concert halls across Europe and has been called one of the most promising pianists of his generation. Please join me in welcoming Victor Ashford." The applause that erupted was different from before. It was thunderous, enthusiastic, the kind of applause reserved for celebrities. Maya heard people around her standing up, their programs fluttering as they clapped harder. She stood too, not wanting to seem disrespectful, though she had no idea who Victor Ashford was. "He must be really good," her mother leaned over to whisper. "There's a line of girls near the front practically swooning." Maya heard footsteps cross the stage, confident, unhurried. Then the creak of the piano bench, a moment of silence, and the music began. She understood immediately why people loved him. Victor Ashford was phenomenal. He was playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire, and he made it sound effortless. His fingers must have been flying across the keys, pulling out cascading runs and thunderous chords that filled every corner of the auditorium. But as Maya listened, she noticed something. Beneath all the technical brilliance, beneath the speed and precision and power, there was something cold about his playing. It was perfect, but it was also somehow empty, like a beautiful photograph of a smile rather than actual joy. He was showing off his skill, but he wasn't sharing his heart. Still, when he finished, the crowd went absolutely wild. People were on their feet again, shouting, cheering. Maya could hear a few whistles. The applause seemed to go on forever. "Thank you, thank you," Victor's voice came through the speakers. He sounded young, probably not much older than Maya, but there was a smugness in his tone that made her uncomfortable. "You're too kind. Really, you are." More laughter and applause. Maya sat back down, her hands gripping the armrests of her seat. She was up soon. Maybe next. The thought made her mouth go dry. The host returned to the microphone. "Wasn't that incredible? Let's hear it one more time for Victor Ashford." Another wave of applause. "Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest with us tonight. Maya Chen is a 17-year-old pianist who has been playing since the age of 4. Despite facing unique challenges, she has developed an extraordinary relationship with music. Please welcome Maya Chen to the stage." Maya's heart stopped. This was it. Her mother helped her stand, and Mrs. Patterson appeared at her other side, gently taking her arm. Together they began guiding her toward the stage. Maya's white cane tapped softly against the floor as they walked up the aisle. Each step felt like a mile. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting. Then, just as they reached the steps leading up to the stage, she heard it. A voice. Young, male, speaking into a microphone with barely suppressed amusement. Well, this should be interesting. It was Victor Ashford. He was still on stage. Maya froze, her foot hovering over the first step. Let's see if she can find all the keys. Laughter rippled through the audience. Some of it was uncomfortable, awkward chuckles from people who didn't know how to react. But some of it was genuine, as if what he had said was actually funny. Maya's face burned. Her hands started trembling. Every insecurity she had ever felt came crashing down on her at once. Maya stood frozen at the bottom of the stage steps, her hand gripping Mrs. Patterson's arm so tightly she could feel her teacher wince. The laughter was still echoing through the auditorium, and each chuckle felt like a slap across her face. Her cheeks were burning so hot she thought everyone must be able to see them glowing in the darkness. Let's see if she can find all the keys. Those words kept replaying in her mind. Victor Ashford had said them so casually, as if mocking a blind girl in front of hundreds of people was just light entertainment. And people had laughed. Actually laughed. "Maya, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson whispered urgently, her voice tight with anger she was trying to hide. "Don't you dare let him win. Don't you dare." But Maya couldn't move. Her legs felt like they had turned to stone. She wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but here. Why had she ever thought she belonged in a place like this? These people with their expensive clothes and their perfect sight, and their cruel humor. They didn't see her as a musician. They saw her as a curiosity, an inspiration story, something to make them feel better about themselves. Her mother appeared on her other side, and Maya could hear the fury in her breathing even though she wasn't saying anything. Her mom was probably restraining herself from marching onto that stage and giving Victor Ashford a piece of her mind. But that would only make things worse. It would confirm what people already thought, that Maya needed protection, that she was fragile, that she was different. "You can do this," her mother whispered, her voice shaking. "Show them who you are." Maya took a breath, then another. Her hands were trembling so badly she wasn't sure she could even play if she made it to the piano. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to turn around and leave. She had never felt so humiliated in her entire life. From the stage, she could hear Victor moving around. He was still up there, probably enjoying the awkwardness he had created. She imagined him smirking, leaning against the piano like he owned it. The host hadn't said anything to stop him or apologize. Nobody had. The silence that had followed the laughter was almost worse than the laughter itself. Mrs. Patterson's grip on her arm tightened, steadying her. "Remember why you play, Maya. Remember what music means to you. Not to them. To you." Something in those words cut through the panic. Maya thought about her grandmother, the woman who had first shown her the piano when she was just 4 years old. Grandma Lynn had been a music teacher in China before moving to America, and she had died when Maya was 10. But before she passed, she had told Maya something that had stayed with her ever since. "Music doesn't need eyes," Grandma Lynn had said in her accented English, placing Maya's small hands on the piano keys. "Music needs heart. And you, little one, you have more heart than anyone I know." Maya lifted her foot and placed it on the first step. Her cane tapped against the wood, finding the edge of the next step. One step, then another. Mrs. Patterson and her mother stayed close but let her lead. The auditorium had gone quiet again, but this time it felt different. The laughter had faded into an uncomfortable tension, as if people suddenly realized they had been part of something cruel. As Maya climbed the final step onto the stage, she could hear Victor's footsteps. He was moving, probably finally heading backstage. Good. She didn't want him anywhere near her. But then she heard something that made her stomach drop, a low chuckle. He was still laughing. "Good luck," he said, his voice dripping with false encouragement. He was still near the microphone, and everyone heard it. "You'll need it." More scattered laughter from the audience, though less than before. Some people were starting to feel uncomfortable now. Maya could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the way the energy in the room had changed from excited anticipation to awkward uncertainty. Mrs. Patterson's hand left her arm as they reached the piano. Maya's fingers found the smooth, cool edge of the bench. She had played thousands of pianos in her life, but each one was different. Each had its own voice, its own personality. She sat down carefully, adjusting her position, trying to remember everything she had practiced. Her hands were still shaking. She placed them in her lap, hidden from view, and tried to steady her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, like her meditation teacher had shown her. But it wasn't working. Her mind was racing, replaying Victor's words over and over. Let's see if she can find all the keys. She could still hear whispers in the audience, not loud enough to make out words, but she didn't need to. She knew what they were saying. Some were probably defending her, calling Victor rude. Others were probably curious to see if she would actually be able to play, or if this whole thing would turn into a disaster. And some, she knew, were hoping for a disaster. People loved watching others fail, especially when it meant they could feel superior. Maya's fingers hovered above the keys. Just touch them, she told herself. Just start. But fear had wrapped itself around her chest like a vice, squeezing tighter and tighter. What if she messed up? What if she proved Victor right? What if she couldn't find the keys? Couldn't remember the piece, couldn't do anything but sit here and humiliate herself further? She thought about standing up and walking away. She could do it right now. Just stand up, find Mrs. Patterson's arm, and walk off this stage with whatever dignity she had left. People would understand. They would probably even sympathize with her after what Victor had said. Poor Maya Chen, too upset to perform, so brave for even trying. But then she heard something that changed everything. A cough from the audience, then a shuffle of programs. Someone checking their phone, the little click of the button audible in the silence. They were getting bored, getting impatient, waiting for her to either play or leave so they could move on to the next performer, to the refreshments in the lobby, to their comfortable lives where they never had to face this kind of humiliation. And suddenly Maya wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry. These people had invited her here. They had asked her to perform at their fancy academy with their fancy audience and their fancy programs. And then they had let some arrogant pianist mock her in front of everyone. They had laughed. They had sat in their comfortable seats and laughed at a blind girl trying to follow her dreams. Well, if they wanted a performance, she would give them one. Maya's hands stopped shaking. Her breathing steadied. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling the familiar smooth surface beneath her fingertips. Middle C under her right thumb. She knew exactly where she was. She had played piano for 13 years. had practiced this piece hundreds of times. She could play it in her sleep. No, she could play it better than that. She could play it better than Victor Ashford had played his showpiece. Because unlike him, she actually understood what music was supposed to be. It wasn't about impressing people. It wasn't about technical perfection or speed or power. It was about truth. It was about taking all the feelings inside you, all the pain and joy and fear and hope, and transforming them into something beautiful. Victor had played for applause. Maya was about to play for something much more important. She closed her eyes. Not because she needed to, but because it centered her, helped her focus. The auditorium was completely silent now. Even the whispers had stopped. Hundreds of people holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next, waiting to see if the blind girl could actually play. Maya smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it was genuine. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Let them judge. She was about to show them something they would never forget. Her fingers pressed down on the first keys, and the opening notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata floated through the auditorium like a whisper in the darkness. The first notes hung in the air like drops of moonlight falling into still water. Soft, gentle, almost fragile, Maya's fingers moved across the keys with the kind of certainty that only comes from thousands of hours of practice, from muscle memory so deep it lived in her bones. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Almost everyone in the audience would recognize it within the first few measures. It was one of the most famous piano pieces ever written, played at recitals and concerts around the world. Some might even think it was too common, too predictable for a showcase like this. But they had never heard it played like this. Maya wasn't just playing the notes on the page. She was telling a story, her story, through Beethoven's composition. Each phrase carried weight, emotion, meaning. The opening movement, usually played with a kind of distant melancholy, became something more personal in her hands. It became loneliness. It became the feeling of being different, of living in a world that wasn't built for you, of hearing people laugh when you're just trying to belong. In the audience, the restless shuffling stopped. The woman who had been checking her phone slowly lowered it to her lap, drawn in by something she couldn't quite name. A man in the third row who had been one of the people laughing at Victor's joke felt his smile fade, replaced by a tightness in his chest he didn't understand. Maya's mother sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Tears were already forming in her eyes. She had heard her daughter play this piece 100 times at home, in their small apartment with the creaky floors and thin walls. But this was different. This was Maya pouring 17 years of experience, of struggle, of proving herself over and over again, into every single note. Mrs. Patterson stood in the wings of the stage, one hand over her mouth. In 13 years of teaching Maya, she had watched her student grow from a curious 4-year-old tapping random keys to this, to a young woman who could make a piano sing in ways that professional musicians spent their whole lives trying to achieve. She had always known Maya was special, but tonight Maya was transcendent. The first movement flowed like a gentle river, each note connected to the next with perfect fluidity. Maya's hands barely seemed to move, yet the music filled every corner of the massive auditorium. People in the back row could hear every subtle dynamic shift, every carefully controlled crescendo and decrescendo. The piano became an extension of Maya herself, responding to her touch like it understood exactly what she wanted to say. Backstage, Victor Ashford leaned against a wall with his arms crossed, a bottle of water in one hand. He had planned to head straight to the green room, maybe sign some autographs, definitely avoid watching whatever happened next on stage. The whole situation had become awkward, and while he didn't exactly regret his joke, he was starting to realize it maybe hadn't landed as well as he thought. But something made him stop. The music reached him even in the dim backstage area, and despite himself, he listened. His expression shifted from casual indifference to something harder to define. His arms slowly uncrossed, the water bottle lowered to his side, forgotten. This wasn't what he had expected, not even close. Maya moved into the second movement, the short intermezzo that most people rush through to get to the famous finale. But she didn't rush. She savored every moment, every chord, letting the brief section breathe and speak. It was like a pause in a conversation, a moment of reflection before the storm. And then came the third movement. If the first movement was moonlight on water, the third movement was lightning in a thunderstorm. Maya's hands exploded across the keyboard with a fury that made several people in the audience actually jump in their seats. The transformation was so sudden, so complete, that it felt like a different person had sat down at the piano. But this wasn't random violence or mere technical display. Every crashing chord, every racing arpeggio, every impossible run up and down the keyboard had purpose. This was anger, yes, but it was righteous anger. This was the fury of every time someone had underestimated her because of her blindness. Every time someone had spoken to her in that patronizing tone, like she was a child who needed special care. Every time someone had assumed she couldn't do something before she even had the chance to try. This was Victor's mockery being transformed into something beautiful and terrible. Maya's fingers flew across, the keys faster than seemed humanly possible. The piano roared under her hands, filling the auditorium with sound so powerful that people could feel it vibrating in their chests. But even in the chaos, there was absolute control. Every note was crystal clear, perfectly articulated, exactly where it needed to be. In the third row, a middle-aged woman who taught piano at a local school felt tears streaming down her face. She had been playing piano for 40 years and had never, not once, heard anything like this. The technical skill was impressive enough, but it was the emotion, the raw honesty in every phrase, that was breaking her heart open. A teenage boy sitting with his parents forgot to look cool for once and sat forward in his seat, completely captivated. He had been forced to come tonight, had spent the first half of the concert texting his friends about how bored he was. His phone now sat dark in his pocket, completely forgotten. Victor stood in the wings, his face pale. His bottle of water slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud, water spilling across the wood. He didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on Maya, on her hands dancing across the keys with a mastery that made his own performance feel hollow in comparison. She was better than him. Not just technically, though even that was debatable, but musically, emotionally, spiritually. She was operating on a level he had never reached. He had played piano for 20 years, had studied with the best teachers money could buy, had performed in the finest concert halls in Europe. And this blind 17-year-old girl from nowhere was making him look like an amateur. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. Maya drove toward the climax of the piece, building layer upon layer of intensity. The music grew louder, faster, more urgent. It was like watching a tidal wave build on the horizon, knowing it was about to crash down but being unable to look away. Her whole body moved with the music now, swaying slightly, feeling every note not just in her fingers but in her entire being. And then, just when it seemed like the music couldn't possibly get any more intense, she pulled back. The volume dropped suddenly, drastically. The fury gave way to something more complex, a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The final page of the sonata, where Beethoven transformed chaos into resolution, became in Maya's hands a story of survival, of refusing to be broken, of taking everything the world threw at you and turning it into something that mattered. The audience sat absolutely frozen. Not a single cough, not a single shuffle, not even the sound of breathing. 1,000 people holding perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter the spell Maya had woven around them. Mrs. Patterson watched with tears streaming freely down her face now. This was why she had become a music teacher. This moment right here, this was proof that music could transcend anything, even darkness, especially darkness. Maya's mother had given up trying to hold back her emotions. She cried openly, proudly, watching her daughter prove to a room full of strangers what she had always known, that Maya wasn't limited by her blindness. If anything, it had given her access to something deeper, something most people never found. The final measures approached. Maya shaped each phrase with devastating precision, drawing out every last drop of meaning from Beethoven's composition. The music grew softer, slower, winding down like a music box running out of power. But even in the quietness there was strength. There was dignity. Maya played the final chord. A soft, gentle conclusion that seemed to ask a question rather than make a statement. The note hung in the air, sustained by the piano's resonance and the auditorium's perfect acoustics. It lasted for what felt like forever, gradually fading into silence. Maya sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the keys. Her eyes were still closed. Her chest rose and fell with deep breaths. She had given everything she had to that performance, had poured her entire soul into 18 minutes of music. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. And then the auditorium exploded. The applause started as a single clap, then another, then suddenly it was everywhere, crashing over Maya like a wave. But this wasn't polite applause. This wasn't the kind of courteous clapping people did because they were supposed to. This was something else entirely. People were on their feet before they even realized they were standing. The sound grew and grew until it was deafening, echoing off the walls and ceiling of the grand auditorium. Maya sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, completely overwhelmed by the response. She had expected applause, of course, but this felt different. This felt like something had shifted in the room, like she had somehow changed the very air around them. "Bravo!" someone shouted from the balcony. Then others joined in. "Bravo, bravo!" The middle-aged piano teacher in the third row was sobbing openly now, not even trying to hide it. Her husband wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his own eyes wet. Around them, people were wiping their faces, pulling tissues from purses and pockets. Grown men who hadn't cried in years found themselves blinking back tears. Teenagers who thought they were too cool to be moved by classical music stood applauding with everyone else, caught up in something they didn't fully understand but could definitely feel. Maya's mother had her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wanted to rush onto the stage and hug her daughter, but she stayed in her seat, clapping until her palms hurt. This was Maya's moment. She deserved to have it all to herself. The applause continued. 30 seconds, a minute. People showed no signs of stopping. Some were clapping over their heads. Others were whistling. A few young women in the front row were jumping up and down, completely losing their composure. Maya slowly stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaky. She turned toward where she knew the audience must be and gave a small, uncertain bow. The applause somehow got even louder. She could feel it vibrating through the stage floor, through her entire body. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her side, taking her arm gently. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Maya, you beautiful, brilliant girl. You did it." Maya's face broke into a genuine smile, the first one since she had arrived at the auditorium. She had done it. She had gotten through it. More than that, she had actually connected with these people. They weren't clapping out of pity or obligation. They were clapping because she had moved them, because her music had reached something inside them that maybe they didn't even know was there. She started to turn toward the wings, ready to leave the stage, but the applause wasn't stopping. If anything, it was getting more insistent. People were calling out her name now. "Maya, Maya, Maya, they want you to bow again," Mrs. Patterson said, squeezing her arm. Maya turned back and bowed once more, deeper this time. The crowd roared its approval. She could hear people stomping their feet now, a rhythmic pounding that shook the entire building. This was the kind of ovation she had only heard in recordings of famous concerts, the kind of response reserved for legendary performers at the height of their careers. And it was for her. 17-year-old Maya Chen from apartment 4B. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes, Mrs. Patterson guided her toward the wings. Even as they walked off stage, the applause continued. Maya could still hear it as they descended the short stairs, as they moved into the dimly lit backstage area. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She felt like she could run a marathon or fly or do anything. The fear and humiliation from earlier seemed like it had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. She had transformed it, channeled it into her performance, and somehow come out the other side. Maya. The voice stopped her in her tracks. It was male, young, and she recognized it instantly. Victor Ashford. She turned toward where his voice had come from, her expression immediately guarding itself. Mrs. Patterson's hand tightened protectively on her arm. That was... Victor's voice was strange, different from how it had sounded on stage. The smugness was gone. He sounded almost uncertain. "I need to talk to you." "I don't think Maya wants to talk to you right now," Mrs. Patterson said coldly. "You've done enough, I know. I know, and that's why I—" Victor paused. Maya heard him take a breath. "I need to apologize." "You can apologize from over there," Mrs. Patterson snapped. "You don't deserve to be near her." But Maya held up her free hand. "It's okay, Mrs. Patterson." "Maya, you don't have to." "It's okay," Maya repeated more firmly this time. She was still riding high on the success of her performance, still feeling invincible. If Victor Ashford wanted to apologize, she would hear him out. And if he wanted to mock her again, well, She had just proven to everyone in that auditorium exactly who was the better musician. Mrs. Patterson reluctantly released her arm but didn't move away. Maya could feel her teacher's protective presence just behind her shoulder. Victor's footsteps approached, stopping a few feet away. Maya waited, her chin lifted slightly, refusing to show any weakness. Victor started, then stopped. He seemed to be struggling to find words, which was unusual for someone who had been so quick with his cruel joke earlier. What I said on stage was unforgivable. It was cruel and stupid, and I have no excuse for it. Maya said nothing. She just waited. I've been playing piano since I was 5 years old. Victor continued, his voice quiet now, almost hard to hear over the muffled sounds of the next performer being introduced on stage. I've studied with the best teachers in the world. I've performed in Vienna, in Paris, in London. I thought I knew what it meant to really play, to really understand music. He paused again. Maya heard him shift his weight, heard what might have been him running a hand through his hair. And then I heard you play, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. And I realized I don't know anything. Not really. What you did out there, that wasn't just technical skill. That was something I've been missing my entire career. Soul, truth, honesty. Maya felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. This wasn't what she had anticipated. She had expected a quick, insincere apology, the kind people gave when they knew they had to say sorry but didn't really mean it. This sounded different. I made fun of you for being blind, Victor said, and now he definitely sounded like he was crying. But the truth is, I'm the one who's been blind. I've been so focused on technique, on impressing people, on building my career, that I forgot why I started playing piano in the first place. I forgot that music is supposed to mean something. The backstage area was quiet except for the distant sound of applause from the auditorium. Someone else's performance had just ended. Mrs. Patterson stood rigid behind Maya, still not trusting Victor but listening despite herself. You don't have to forgive me, Victor said. What I did was horrible and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I needed you to know that you didn't just play beautifully tonight. You reminded me of something I had lost. You reminded everyone in that auditorium of why music matters. Maya stood there processing his words. Part of her wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the hurt and humiliation. He had tried to embarrass her in front of hundreds of people. He had mocked her disability, had made her feel small and worthless. But another part of her, the part that had just poured her soul into Beethoven's sonata, understood something that maybe Victor was just beginning to learn. Holding on to anger was like holding on to a hot coal. It hurt you more than anyone else. Thank you for the apology, Maya said finally, her voice steady. I accept it. You do? Victor sounded genuinely surprised. I do, Maya confirmed. But that doesn't mean I trust you. And it doesn't mean what you did was okay. I know it's not okay. Good. Maya paused, then added something she hadn't planned to say. You're a brilliant pianist, Victor. Technically, you're probably better than I'll ever be. But technique isn't everything. Maybe you should spend less time showing off and more time figuring out what you actually want to say with your music. There was a long silence. Then Victor laughed, but it wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the kind of laugh someone makes when they've just heard a hard truth they desperately needed to hear. You're right, he said simply. You're absolutely right. More footsteps approached from the stage area. The host was probably coming to find Maya to tell her what came next. The showcase wasn't over yet and there were still logistics to handle. But before anyone else arrived, Victor spoke one more time. Would you? He hesitated. Would you consider teaching me? Not technique, but the other stuff, the important stuff. Maya tilted her head, surprised. Teach you? I know it's a lot to ask after what I did. And I understand if you say no, but I'm serious. I want to learn how to play the way you play. With heart. Mrs. Patterson made a small sound of disbelief behind Maya. The request was audacious, especially given what had happened less than 30 minutes ago. But Maya found herself smiling, not because she had forgiven Victor completely, not because she thought they would become best friends, but because his request proved something important. She had won. Maya stood in the backstage hallway, Victor's question hanging in the air between them. Teach him? The idea seemed almost ridiculous considering what had happened earlier. And yet, there was something genuine in his voice, something broken and humble that she couldn't quite ignore. I'll think about it, she said finally. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Victor seemed to understand that was the best he was going to get. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. The host appeared around the corner, slightly out of breath. Maya, there you are. The audience is asking for an encore. I've never seen anything like this. People are refusing to leave until you play something else. Maya's eyebrows shot up. An encore? But there are still other performers. They've all agreed to let you go back on, the host said, excitement bubbling in his voice. This is extraordinary. The last time we had a standing ovation like this was 15 years ago, when Yuja Wang performed here. Mrs. Patterson squeezed Maya's shoulder. You don't have to if you're too tired, sweetheart. But Maya wasn't tired. If anything, she felt more alive than she ever had. The fear and anxiety that had been weighing her down all evening had evaporated completely. She had faced the worst moment she could have imagined, and she had turned it into triumph. What did she have to be afraid of now? I'll do it, she said, smiling. But I want to play something different. Something shorter. Whatever you want, the host said immediately. The stage is yours. Maya thought for a moment. The Moonlight Sonata had been powerful, cathartic, necessary. But for an encore, she wanted something different. Something that expressed how she felt right now, in this moment. Standing backstage at the most prestigious music academy in the country, having just proven to everyone that she belonged here. Chopin, she said. Nocturne in E-flat major, Mrs. Patterson smiled. She knew that piece well. It was one of Maya's favorites, something she played when she was happy, when she wanted to share joy rather than pain. It was the perfect choice. They walked back toward the stage together. As Maya emerged from the wings, the audience erupted again. She hadn't even sat down yet, and they were already on their feet, applauding. She could hear people calling her name, could feel the warmth of their appreciation washing over her like sunshine. She made her way to the piano and sat down, waiting for the audience to settle. It took almost a full minute for the applause to die down. When silence finally fell, Maya placed her hands on the keys and began to play. If the Moonlight Sonata had been a storm, the Chopin Nocturne was a gentle summer evening. The melody floated through the auditorium like a butterfly, delicate and beautiful. Maya's touch was so light, so precise, that each note seemed to shimmer in the air before fading away. This wasn't about power or technical showmanship. This was about pure, simple beauty. The audience listened in rapt silence. After the emotional intensity of her previous performance, this felt like a gift. Like Maya was thanking them for their support by sharing something intimate and precious. The piece was only about 5 minutes long, but every second of it felt perfect. When the final notes died away, the applause that followed was different from before. It was warm, grateful, almost reverent. People clapped steadily, smiling through their tears, feeling like they had witnessed something special. Not just a talented performance, but a moment that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Maya stood and bowed once more, then made her way off stage for the final time that evening. Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the wings, her face glowing with pride. That was perfect, her teacher said, pulling her into a tight hug. Absolutely perfect. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The showcase continued with the remaining performers, but Maya barely processed any of it. People kept approaching her during intermission, wanting to shake her hand, to tell her how much her performance had moved them. The piano teacher, who had been crying in the audience, introduced herself and said she would be completely changing how she taught her students after tonight. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, asked shyly if Maya could sign her program. Maya did, carefully writing her name in the careful script she had learned through years of practice. Even the other performers, who might have been resentful that Maya had stolen the show, came up to congratulate her. They had been moved too. They understood that what happened tonight was bigger than competition or jealousy. It was about music doing what music was supposed to do, bringing people together and reminding them of their shared humanity. Victor kept his distance for most of the evening, but Maya could sense him watching from across the room during the reception afterward. She didn't seek him out, but she didn't avoid him either. She had said what she needed to say, and the rest was up to him. It was almost 11 o'clock by the time Maya and her mother finally made it to the parking lot. Mrs. Patterson walked them out, still chattering excitedly about the performance, about the response, about the opportunities that would surely come from this. The academy director wants to offer you a full scholarship, Mrs. Patterson said as they reached the car. He pulled me aside during the reception. They want you to study here, Maya. Can you believe it? Maya could believe it. After tonight, she felt like she could believe anything. We'll talk about it tomorrow, her mother said gently, sensing that Maya was starting to fade. The adrenaline was wearing off and exhaustion was setting in. Right now, this girl needs to get home and rest. They said their goodbyes and Maya climbed into the passenger seat of her mother's old sedan. As they pulled out of the parking lot, her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "Not just for how you played tonight, but for how you handled everything. You showed them who you are, baby. You showed them that you're so much more than they could have imagined." Maya leaned her head against the window, feeling the cool glass against her forehead. "I was so scared, Mom. When he said that about finding the keys, I wanted to disappear. I know you were. But you didn't run. You stayed, and you turned that fear into something beautiful. That takes real courage." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the streetlights passing by outside. Maya thought about everything that had happened, about how close she had come to walking away, about how Victor's cruelty had actually pushed her to play better than she ever had before. "Do you think I should teach him?" Maya asked suddenly. "Victor, I mean. Do you think I should help him?" Her mother was quiet for a moment, considering. "Do you want to?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks he doesn't deserve my help, but another part of me thinks—" She trailed off, trying to find the right words. "He was lost tonight. I could hear it in his apology. He's been playing music his whole life, but somewhere along the way he forgot why it mattered. And I think maybe I could help him remember." "Then there's your answer," her mother said. "You have a gift, Maya. Not just for playing, but for understanding what music really means. If you can share that with someone, even someone who hurt you, that's a gift worth giving." Maya smiled in the darkness of the car. Her mother was right. She had spent so much of her life proving herself, fighting to be taken seriously, struggling against people's assumptions about what a blind person could or couldn't do. But tonight she had moved beyond all of that. She hadn't just proven she could play. She had shown everyone that she had something to teach. 3 weeks later, Maya received a message through Mrs. Patterson. It was from Victor. He had withdrawn from his European tour and was planning to take a year off from performing. He wanted to focus on rediscovering his love for music, on learning to play with honesty instead of just technique, and he was still hoping, if she was willing, that she might help him. Maya thought about it for 2 days. Then she sent back a simple response. "Come to my apartment next Saturday at 2 o'clock. Bring your humility and leave your ego at the door." Victor showed up 5 minutes early, carrying nothing but a notebook and an apology in his eyes. Maya answered the door with her mother hovering protectively in the background. But when Victor stepped inside and Maya heard the nervousness in his breathing, the genuine uncertainty in how he moved, she knew he was serious. They sat at Maya's old upright piano, the same one her grandmother had taught her on all those years ago. It was nothing like the grand pianos at concert halls, but it had heart. It had history. "Okay," Maya said, her hands resting on the familiar keys. "First lesson. Close your eyes." "But I'm not blind," Victor said, confused. "I know," Maya replied with a small smile. "But for the next hour, I want you to pretend you are. I want you to stop seeing the piano and start feeling it. Stop thinking about your fingers and start listening to your heart. Music doesn't need eyes, Victor. It needs something deeper." Victor closed his eyes, and slowly, carefully, Maya began to teach him what her grandmother had taught her all those years ago. That music wasn't about impressing people or winning awards or building a career. It was about taking the darkness inside you, whatever form that darkness took, and transforming it into light. Outside the apartment window, the world continued on. But inside that small room with the old piano, something shifted. A famous pianist began to learn what it really meant to play, and a blind girl who had been mocked became the teacher she was always meant to be. The video of Maya's performance at Riverside Music Academy went viral within a week. Millions of people watched it, shared it, commented on it. The caption that accompanied it everywhere was simple but powerful: "When you judge what you cannot see." But for Maya, the real victory wasn't in the views or the fame or even the scholarship offers that came flooding in. It was in the moment, that very first lesson with Victor, when she heard him play a simple scale with actual feeling for the first time. When she heard him stop performing and start connecting. That was when she knew that the girl who had walked onto that stage terrified and humiliated had become someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who could transform darkness into light not just for herself but for others too. And that was worth more than any standing ovation could ever be.